Well, they worked it out as couples can and do. And then Janice became pregnant. And then she had a miscarriage. And she was lying there feeling sorry for herself in the terrible aftermath of not feeling very well. And she was lying there in her bed, and she looked out the window and she saw this beautiful tree that was blooming. It was dry season, and nothing else was blooming. Nothing was growing, but this one tree came out with all of its beautiful limbs and blossoms in the dry season. And she asked Emmanuel, who was their servant at the time. He did the cooking and whatever they needed to have done. And she said, Emmanuel, look at that bush. What is it? And so Emmanuel looked and said, well, madam, I see it on many compounds, but it's the British brought it here. This is not an African bush, but I see it everywhere now. Well, it is beautiful, Janice murmured. A foreign tree growing here in the country, lending its promise of life and beauty in the heat and stink of the dry season. Perhaps this was an omen, her omen, to do some good here in this hot, desperate land. Emmanuel, she said, today we're going to start studying Igbo. Emmanuel stopped. It is good, madam. After the dry season, the rains always return. Are the rains returning? She asked. Not yet, madam, but they will come. Always the rains return. But when she asked Obi, he didn't know the name of the tree either. It is one of the good things left us by the foreigners, he said. Obi, she said hesitantly, let Ezekwe come and live with us and be taught. Obi looked at her. You want Ezekwe to come and live in our house, my native son? Yes, she said. As your son, I want him to have the best thing that we can offer him. So they bring little Ezekwe, and she teaches him, and he becomes very attached to her. She teaches him to read, and Obi says to her, my American wife, I do not deserve you. So Ezekwe comes, and then one day she paints a picture of Ezekwe, and it's beautiful. She's so proud of herself, and she wants to give it to Obi for his birthday. And she says, he took it and he said, I want to put it someplace else. And then she knew he wanted to give it to first wife. So she said, Obi, do whatever you want to with this picture. But she was a little bit aggravated. So he took the picture back to the village and gave it to his first wife, because now they had Ezekwe, but she could have his picture. Well, as it happened one morning, Emmanuel came telling her to get up quickly, get up quickly. She had to go with him to the village. And she said, oh, Emmanuel, I'm not ready. And he said, first wife has called for you. And she said, first wife? I am not going to do what first wife says. And he said, Madame, she is dying. So he said, okay, I'll go. So she went with Emmanuel, took her to the village. Obi was still sleeping. They just left him. And then when they got to the village, she went into the woman's room. And the first thing she saw was Ezekwe's picture there on the wall. And she saw that it was not covered with spider webs. It was carefully dusted. And this dying woman was lying there and held out her hand. And she said, I wanted to tell you, thank you. Many in the village thinks that you have put a curse on me, but I know you do not curse me. Thank you. And then the woman died. And she was afraid, my gosh. So she went out, and Obi came in then because he had heard the news. And she thought, Obi, what will we do? What will we tell Ezekwe? And he said, we shall not tell him. But we'll have to tell him something, Janice reasoned. What will he say when we ask of his mother when he visits here? We shall tell him, Obi faltered. Then a note of awe came into his voice. We shall tell Ezekwe that his mother has gone to her village. Gone to her village. Valhalla, Nirvana, paradise, heaven, Ezekwe's mother has gone to her village. After that, many changes came about with Obi. He seemed always anxious. He never smiled. He was out of sorts, and she didn't understand. And then one day he told her that the east of Nigeria was getting away from Nigeria and was going to set up a new country. Biafra, they were going to call it. They had all the oil, they had all the educated people, and they were going to withdraw. They were not going to do anything else. So after that time, he left. Obi left and said he was going to join the forces fighting for Biafra. So there she was left with Ezekwe on her own and Emmanuel. So they called her in. The invading forces from Nigeria came in and they called her in and questioned her because they knew that Obi was out fighting the resistance for Biafra. And they just knew, she knew where he was, she knew all their secrets, and she said, no, I don't know where he is, I don't know anything about him, I have not seen him. And so they said, we'll let you go, but we'll keep our eye on you. So that night, Emmanuel said, Madam, we must go to the village. So they went to the village, and there they survived with the people who were there. The villagers, when the invading army from Nigeria came, the women ran to the river. They took refuge just in the river, hoping that the guys would not find them there. Well, finally, they were hungry, and Emmanuel scavenged around and got something for them to eat. And one day he found 2 eggs, and he brought it to her and said, Madam, we have something to eat today. And she said, Madam, where did you get it, Emmanuel? And he said, Madam, I have stolen it. So that's the way they lived in the village, on just scavenging for things till they keep from starving to death. And one time there was a child she saw out in the forest, had just been left to die. And so she said, Emmanuel, how can they do this? Just abandon a child. And he said, Madam, when there's nothing for the child to eat, best to leave him here to cry than to take him home and see him die in your arms. So Obi does not know that Janice is in the village at all. So he comes to check on the village. His forces are not too far away. And he was surprised to find Janice there. And by this time, Janice is so ill because she evidently had malaria. The African people had some resistance to it, but Janice did not have any resistance to it at all. So she was very ill and very weak. And Obi said, we will get you to the hospital. I know there is a hospital in the bush. We will get you there. And so she said, okay, Obi, but I'm so weak. So he tried to take her away. While they were leaving, they stopped to rest alongside of a school. And she could hear planes overhead. And she thought, there's a plane. Now, I need to get on that plane. That plane is going back to America. But here she was, and she couldn't. And so she heard planes droning, and far back in her mind, she tried to remember something about a plane. The plane was leaving. She must get on it. But when she struggled upward, she could not rise. Something was holding her to this place. Strong arms held her, bound her. And with great effort, she turned her eyes to Obi's strained face. Obi, tell Ezekwe that I've gone to my village. And then she closed her eyes and murmured, it's a very special place. up on the mountain.